Marcus Chen had always been a sucker for strays. His small apartment above the old bookstore barely had room for himself, let alone the growing collection of rescue cats that seemed to find their way to his doorstep. But when he saw the three emaciated felines huddled behind the dumpster on that cold October night, he couldn't just walk past. The first was a massive orange tabby, with one torn ear and scars across his face. The second, a sleek black cat with intelligent green eyes that seemed to pierce right through him. But it was the third that made him stop completely. A small silver-white cat with the most unusual markings he'd ever seen. Intricate patterns that looked almost like scales ran along her sides, and her eyes were a deep purple that seemed to shift and shimmer in the streetlight. "Come on, then," Marcus murmured, crouching down with the bag of cat food he always carried. "Let's get you three warmed up." The orange tabby approached first, clearly the brave one of the group. The black cat followed cautiously, but the silver one hung back, watching him with those strange eyes. When she finally approached, Marcus felt an odd sensation, like static electricity dancing across his skin. Back in his apartment, Marcus set up temporary beds and filled water bowls. The orange cat, whom he dubbed Tank for obvious reasons, immediately made himself at home. The black cat, more reserved, found a perch on the bookshelf where he could observe everything. Marcus decided to call him Shadow. The silver cat was different entirely. She moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her steps completely silent on the hardwood floor. When Marcus offered her food, she sniffed it delicately, then looked up at him with what could only be described as a grateful nod. He named her Luna for the way she seemed to glow in the moonlight streaming through his window. Over the next few days, the three cats settled into a routine. Tank was the muscle, intimidating any other strays that might threaten their new territory. Shadow served as the scout, always alert and watching the windows and doors. But Luna was clearly the leader. The other two deferred to her constantly, bringing her the best pieces of food and positioning themselves protectively around her when she slept. Marcus noticed other strange things too. His apartment, which had always been drafty and cold, now maintained a comfortable temperature even though he hadn't touched the thermostat. His plants, which he'd been slowly killing through neglect, suddenly burst into vibrant health. And sometimes late at night he could swear he heard soft voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. It was on the fourth night that everything changed. Marcus woke to the sound of his fire escape being rattled by what he assumed was strong wind, but when he looked out his window, the night was perfectly still. The rattling continued, more violent now, and he could hear what sounded like voices shouting in the alley below. Luna appeared at his side, her purple eyes now glowing with an inner light that definitely wasn't normal. She looked up at him, and for a moment Marcus could have sworn he heard her voice in his head. "They've found me." Before he could process this impossible thought, his window exploded inward. Three figures in dark, form-fitting suits rappelled through the opening, moving with inhuman speed and precision. They weren't entirely human. Their faces were elongated with scales instead of skin and eyes like molten gold. "Surrender. Exile," one of them hissed, speaking in accented English. "Your rebellion ends here." Luna stepped forward and the air around her began to shimmer. The temperature in the room spiked, and Marcus felt the same static sensation he'd experienced when he first found her, but magnified 100-fold. The small silver cat began to change, her form stretching and expanding in impossible ways. What emerged wasn't a cat at all. Luna stood 7 feet tall, her silver hair cascading down her back like liquid mercury. Her skin had the same scale-like patterns he'd noticed before, but now they gleamed with an inner fire. Most shocking of all were the wings, translucent membranes that stretched from her shoulders, catching and reflecting the light like stained glass. "I am Lirelai, queen of the draconic houses," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that made the windows vibrate. "And you will address me as such." The intruders fell back, clearly not expecting this transformation, but they recovered quickly, drawing weapons that hummed with energy. "The exile queen," one spat. "Your reign ended when you were cast out. Submit to judgment." Tank and Shadow had also transformed, though not as dramatically. Tank now stood on his hind legs, easily 8 feet tall and covered in armor-like scales. Shadow had become something like a ninja, his form wreathed in actual darkness that seemed to bend light around him. "My faithful guardians," Lirelai said without taking her eyes off the intruders. "Protect the human. Marcus found himself grabbed by Shadow and pulled behind the relative safety of his overturned couch as the battle erupted. Energy weapons discharged with sounds like thunder. Tank roared challenges in that unknown language while grappling with two of the attackers. Lyrelay moved like liquid lightning, dodging and weaving while what looked like small stars erupted from her hands. The fight was brief, but devastating. His apartment was completely destroyed, scorch marks on every surface and furniture reduced to splinters. But when the smoke cleared, the three intruders lay unconscious on his floor, and his three cats, or rather, his three alien refugees, stood victorious. "I owe you an explanation," Lyrelay said, her form shimmering as she returned to her cat appearance, "and an apology. By showing you kindness, you've now become involved in matters far beyond your world." Marcus looked around at his destroyed home, then down at the small silver cat who was apparently an exiled alien queen. Any sane person would be running and screaming. Instead, he found himself asking, "Are you hurt? Any of you?" Tank, back in orange tabby form but still twice the size of a normal cat, began purring. Shadow sat down and began calmly grooming himself, and Luna, Lyrelay, looked up at him with those purple eyes that now held depths he was only beginning to understand. "No," she said softly. "Thanks to you, we're all safe. But Marcus, this is only the beginning." The next morning brought a knock on Marcus's door that made all three cats instantly alert. Tank positioned himself between the door and Lyrelay, while Shadow melted into the shadows cast by the broken furniture. Lyrelay herself remained in cat form, but Marcus could see the tension in every line of her small body. "Mr. Chen?" The voice was professional, authoritative. "Agent Rodriguez, Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs. We need to talk." Marcus looked around at his destroyed apartment. The government knowing about last night's events wasn't exactly surprising, but it was still terrifying. He opened the door to find a woman in a dark suit, flanked by two men who were obviously military despite their civilian clothes. "May we come in?" Agent Rodriguez asked, though she was already stepping through the doorway. Her eyes swept the destruction, taking in every detail. "Quite a party you had here?" "I can explain," Marcus started, but she held up a hand. "No need. We know exactly what happened." She pulled out a tablet, showing him footage that must have been taken from a satellite or drone. 3 draconic infiltrators attempting to capture or eliminate an exile. 1 human civilian caught in the crossfire. She looked directly at him. "The question is whether you're a willing collaborator or an innocent bystander." Tank growled low in his throat, a sound that didn't belong to any Earth cat. Agent Rodriguez noticed immediately. "Interesting bodyguards you have, Mr. Chen." She crouched down, studying Luna with professional interest. "The readings we're getting from this one are off the charts. She's not exactly hiding her true nature, is she?" Marcus felt a moment of panic, but Lyrelay stood and walked calmly to the agent. She sat down directly in front of her and fixed those purple eyes on Rodriguez's face. For a long moment, the two females stared at each other in absolute silence. "You're not the first," Agent Rodriguez said finally. "Dragons, I mean. We've been aware of your people for about 3 years now, ever since the incident in Nevada." She stood and faced Marcus directly. "What we haven't seen before is one of them bonding with a human civilian. Usually they keep to themselves or work directly with our military advisors." "Military advisors?" Marcus asked. "Oh yes. Turns out dragons are excellent at strategic planning, and their technology is centuries ahead of ours. We have several working with us officially." She gestured to Luna. "But this one is different. She's not in our database, which means she's either very new to Earth or very good at hiding." Lyrelay meowed once, a sound that somehow conveyed volumes of information. Agent Rodriguez nodded as if she understood. "She says she's not here officially. A political exile seeking asylum." Rodriguez looked between Marcus and the cat. "And she's requested that you be designated as her official human liaison." "I'm sorry, what?" "It's a provision in the treaty we signed with the draconic houses. Any dragon seeking asylum has the right to choose a human advocate, someone to help them navigate our legal and social systems." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Congratulations, Mr. Chen. You're now officially a diplomatic attaché." The implications hit Marcus like a truck. "I run a bookstore. I don't know anything about diplomacy or aliens or—" "You'll learn." Agent Rodriguez handed him a business card. "Report to this address Monday morning. We'll start your briefing then." She paused at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Chen? This conversation never happened. As far as anyone else knows, you had a gas leak explosion. Insurance will cover the repairs. After she left, Marcus sat heavily on his damaged couch and looked at his 3 cats. Tank had returned to his usual spot by the food bowl, but kept one eye on the windows. Shadow had emerged from hiding and was methodically checking every possible entry point, and Luna sat in front of him, her expression unmistakably apologetic. "So," Marcus said to the room in general, "anyone want to tell me what I've gotten myself into?" Luna shifted, taking her human form but remaining seated on the floor. In this form, her otherworldly beauty was even more apparent, but it was her expression of vulnerability that struck him most. "The draconic houses are dying," she said simply. "Our homeworld is becoming uninhabitable, and our people are scattered across a dozen colony worlds that can barely support us. Some houses want to negotiate with younger species for resources and territory. Others believe we should simply take what we need." Tank transformed as well, his massive humanoid form making the small apartment feel even more cramped. "Lyrelai led the peace faction," he rumbled in a voice like distant thunder. "She believed in cooperation, in finding ways for our peoples to coexist." "The war faction disagreed," Shadow added, his form remaining wreathed in darkness even in human shape. "They staged a coup. Lyrelai barely escaped with her life. And you two?" "Tank is my cousin, son of a minor house," Lyrelai explained. "Shadow was my spy master, the one who discovered the coup in time for us to flee." Marcus processed this. "So Earth is what, a refugee camp?" "Earth is hope," Lyrelai said firmly. "Your species is young but incredibly adaptable. You've survived ice ages, plagues, wars that should have destroyed you, and yet you continue to innovate, to grow, to reach for the stars." She stood, moving to the window. "More importantly, you're the first species we've encountered that treats refugees with anything approaching kindness." "Not all of us," Marcus said, thinking of the news reports he'd seen about refugee camps and border walls. "Enough of you," she corrected. "Enough that we have hope." Tank moved to join her at the window. "The war faction sees Earth as a conquest, rich in resources, weak in defenses. They don't understand that strength isn't always measured in firepower." "Those 3 last night," Marcus said. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Not those 3 specifically," Shadow answered. "But yes, the war faction won't give up easily. Capturing or killing Lyrelai would eliminate the strongest voice for peace." Marcus stood and walked to his small kitchen, stepping carefully around the debris. He put on a pot of coffee, a ritual that helped him think. "So what happens now?" "Now," Lyrelai said, "you learn about galactic politics. You become my voice in human governments, and hopefully together we find a way to prevent a war that would devastate both our species. And if we can't?" The 3 dragons exchanged glances. It was Tank who answered, his voice grim. "Then Earth becomes the first casualty in a conflict that will consume half the galaxy." Marcus poured his coffee and considered his options. A week ago, his biggest worry had been whether he could afford to fix the bookstore's heating system. Now he was apparently a diplomatic attaché for an alien queen, trying to prevent an interstellar war. He looked at Luna, Lyrelai, standing by his broken window, her silver hair catching the morning light. She'd trusted him enough to reveal her true nature, trusted him enough to ask for his help. Tank and Shadow had risked their lives to protect not just her but him as well. "Okay," he said finally. "I guess I'd better learn fast." Lyrelai smiled, the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her. "Thank you, Marcus. You have no idea what this means." "I'm starting to get an idea," he replied, taking a sip of his coffee. "But I have a feeling I'm in for a lot more surprises." Through the broken window, the sound of sirens approached, probably the cover story gas leak. Marcus Chen, bookstore owner and accidental diplomat, watched the emergency vehicles arrive and wondered what exactly he'd signed up for. The Department of Extraterrestrial Affairs building looked like any other government office from the outside, but Marcus quickly learned that appearances were deceiving. Agent Rodriguez led him through security checkpoints that scanned for everything from weapons to exotic energy signatures, past laboratories where humans in lab coats worked alongside beings that definitely weren't human. "The public isn't ready for full disclosure yet," Rodriguez explained as they walked. "But we've been working with select alien species for years. Trade agreements, technology exchanges, cultural studies. The dragons were among the first to make formal contact." They entered a conference room where Marcus got his first real look at an official dragon representative. Commander Thane was massive even in human form. easily 7 feet tall with golden scales visible along his neck and hands. His eyes were the same molten gold as the attackers from the other night, but they held intelligence and patience rather than hostility. "Mr. Chen," Thane said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air vibrate slightly, "I understand you've become quite involved with our political situation." "Not by choice," Marcus replied, then immediately worried he'd been too blunt. Thane laughed, a sound like controlled thunder. "I appreciate honesty. It's a rare quality in diplomacy." His expression grew serious. "What Agent Rodriguez hasn't told you yet is that your situation is more complex than a simple asylum case." "How so?" Rodriguez activated a holographic display that showed star charts Marcus couldn't begin to understand. "The draconic houses aren't the only ones interested in Earth. We're at a crossroads. Mr. Chen, humanity is about to enter galactic politics whether we're ready or not. 3 major factions are watching us," Thane continued. "The Draconic War faction sees Earth as a prize to be conquered. The Confederation of Worlds sees us as potential junior partners, useful but ultimately disposable. And the Peace faction, led by your Lyrelay, sees humanity as equals worthy of genuine alliance." Marcus felt a chill. "And whichever faction we align with determines our future." "Exactly." Rodriguez manipulated the display, showing fleet movements around nearby star systems. Each faction has representatives heading to Earth for what they're calling a First Contact Summit. Officially, it's to establish formal diplomatic relations. Unofficially, it's to determine which faction gets to claim humanity. "Where do I fit in?" "You're Lyraleigh's official liaison," Thane explained. "But more than that, you're proof that her philosophy works. A human who chose to help dragons not for profit or power, but simply because it was right. That kind of natural cooperation is what she's been arguing for." "The summit is in 2 weeks," Rodriguez added. "You'll be presenting humanity's response to each faction's proposals." Marcus nearly choked. "I'll be what? I can't speak for all of humanity." "No," Thane agreed. "But you can speak for the part of humanity that matters most. The part that shows kindness to strangers. That chooses compassion over fear." They spent the next several hours going over briefing materials that made Marcus's head spin. Trade agreements, territorial rights, technology sharing protocols, military alliance structures. By the time they finished, he felt completely overwhelmed. "This is insane," he said finally. "I'm not qualified for any of this." "None of us were initially," Rodriguez replied. "I was a border patrol agent 3 years ago. Thane was a military scout. But sometimes history chooses ordinary people for extraordinary moments." When Marcus returned to his temporary apartment the government had provided housing while his real place was being repaired, he found his 3 cats waiting with expressions of concern. While Tank and Shadow looked concerned, Luna looked determined. "How did it go?" she asked, shifting to human form as soon as he closed the door. "Terrifying," Marcus answered honestly. "Apparently I'm going to be speaking for humanity at some kind of galactic summit." "You'll do well," she said with confidence he definitely didn't feel. "I've watched you these past weeks. You have something many species lack, the ability to see beyond your own immediate needs. What happens if I mess this up?" Shadow materialized from the corner where he'd been invisible. "If you choose poorly, Earth becomes either a vassal state, a conquered territory, or a battlefield. There's no neutral option." "No pressure," Marcus muttered. Tank, still in cat form, jumped onto his lap and began purring. "The war faction is led by my uncle, General Vorthak. He believes might makes right, that cooperation is weakness. He'll offer humanity advanced technology and protection in exchange for submission. The Confederation will offer membership and trade rights," Shadow added. "But humans would always be junior partners, never truly equal." "And your faction?" "True alliance," Lyrelay said simply. "Partnership between equals. Shared knowledge, mutual defense, respect for sovereignty. But it's also the riskiest path." "Why?" "Because it requires trust," she explained. "The Confederation and the war faction offer certainty. You know exactly where humanity would stand. An equal alliance means both species taking risks, both being vulnerable." Marcus spent that night reading through the briefing materials again, but his mind kept wandering to the events that had brought him here. A few homeless cats in an alley, a simple act of kindness. How had that snowballed into potentially determining humanity's future? The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus answered his door to find a woman in an expensive suit. flanked by two men who radiated the same dangerous aura as the dragon attackers. Mr. Chen, I'm Dr. Helena Voss, representing certain interests that are concerned about your upcoming responsibilities. I'm sorry, who? May we come in? We have a proposition that might interest you. Against his better judgment, Marcus let them in. Dr. Voss moved to his window and looked out at the city below. Impressive view. Tell me, Mr. Chen, do you really want the responsibility of speaking for 4 billion people? It's closer to 8 billion now, Marcus corrected, even worse. She turned to face him. What if I told you there was a way to ensure humanity's future, without all this uncertainty? A guaranteed path to prosperity and security? I'd ask what the catch was. No catch. Simply choose the war faction at the summit. General Vorthak has authorized me to offer you substantial compensation for your cooperation. Marcus felt his cats tense, even though they remained in animal form. Tank's tail was twitching in a way that suggested violence, and Shadow had positioned himself for attack. And if I refuse? Dr. Voss smiled, but it was cold and calculating. I hope you won't. After all, you wouldn't want anything to happen to your pets. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus looked down at Luna, who was staring at Dr. Voss with an expression of pure fury. I need time to think, Marcus said carefully. Of course, but don't take too long. The summit is approaching quickly. She headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Chen? We'll be in touch. After they left, Lyrelei immediately shifted to human form, her eyes blazing with anger. Vorthak's agents? She spat. I should have expected this. They threatened you, Marcus said, surprising himself with how angry he felt. They threatened you too, Tank pointed out, now in his massive humanoid form. That woman isn't human. I could smell the genetic modifications from here. Probably Confederation, Shadow agreed. They've been known to use enhanced humans as agents. Marcus looked at his 3 companions, his friends, he realized. These beings who had trusted him with their lives, who had brought him into a conflict that spanned star systems. They picked the wrong approach, he said finally. What do you mean? Lyrelei asked. I might have been intimidated by threats to me, but threatening you 3? Marcus shook his head. That just made this personal. Luna smiled, the first truly happy expression he'd seen from her since this all began. I told Tank and Shadow that I'd chosen well. Now we just have to make sure I don't get us all killed at this summit. You won't, she said with absolute confidence. Because you understand something that neither the war faction nor the Confederation grasps. What's that? True strength isn't about having the biggest weapons or the most advanced technology. It's about having people willing to stand beside you no matter the odds. Looking at his unlikely companions, Marcus began to think she might be right. The Galactic Summit was being held at a specially constructed facility in the Nevada desert, built using a combination of human and dragon technology. As Marcus arrived in the government transport, he could see massive ships hovering in the sky above the complex, vessels from each of the 3 factions, their designs speaking to their philosophies. The war faction's ship was a brutal wedge of black metal bristling with visible weapons. The Confederation vessel was sleek and silver, all smooth curves and hidden capabilities. And the Peace faction's ship looked almost organic, its surface seeming to shift and flow like living metal. Impressive, isn't it? Agent Rodriguez said from beside him. First time humanity has hosted representatives from multiple galactic powers. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders again. In his briefcase were the prepared statements representing humanity's official responses to each faction's proposals. But he also carried something else, a simple letter written by Lyrelei, explaining her people's situation in her own words. The summit hall was enormous, with sections designated for each delegation. Marcus found himself at a podium facing 3 very different groups. The war faction delegation was led by General Vorthak, who even in humanoid form was clearly built for violence. His scales were darker than Lyrelei's, almost black, and his eyes held no warmth at all. The Confederation representatives were harder to read. They appeared human at first glance, but Marcus had learned to look for the subtle signs of genetic modification. 2 perfect features, eyes that reflected light strangely, movements that were just slightly too fluid. And then there was the Peace faction. Lyrelei sat at the center of their delegation, flanked by Tank and Shadow in their human forms. She caught his eye and nodded slightly, a gesture of support that gave him strength. Ladies, Gentlemen and honored beings, the moderator began, we are here to discuss humanity's entry into galactic civilization. Each faction will present their proposal, followed by humanity's official response. General Vorthak stood first, his massive form dominating the space. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of absolute command. Humans of Earth, he began, your species shows promise. You are warriors by nature, survivors who have conquered your own world through strength and determination. The Draconic Military Alliance offers you protection, advanced technology, and a place in our expanding empire. He activated a holographic display showing star maps, fleet movements, territorial boundaries. Join us and you will never want for resources. Your enemies will become our enemies. Your expansion will be guaranteed. All we ask in return is your loyalty and your military support in our ongoing conflicts. The display shifted to show human soldiers fighting alongside dragon warriors, Earth ships enhanced with exotic technologies, human colonies spreading across the galaxy under draconic protection. Choose strength, Vorthak concluded. Choose certainty. Choose victory. The Confederation representative, a woman who introduced herself as Ambassador Keelix, stood next. Her presentation was more subtle, filled with economic projections and trade agreements. The Confederation of Worlds offers membership to qualifying species, she said smoothly. Humanity has shown remarkable adaptability and innovation. As junior partners, you would have access to our markets, our knowledge, our established trade routes. Her holographs showed bustling trade stations, human merchants working alongside alien counterparts, technological marvels being shared between species. We offer stability, she continued, a proven system that has brought prosperity to dozens of worlds. Yes, humans would initially hold junior status, but over time, as you prove yourselves, your standing would improve. It's a safe path to the stars. Finally, it was Lyralay's turn. She stood gracefully, her silver hair catching the light, and Marcus noticed that she didn't use any holographic displays at all. Fellow beings, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, I will not offer you certainty because the universe provides none. I will not promise you safety because growth requires risk. What I offer instead is partnership. She walked forward, addressing not just the human delegation but everyone present. My people are dying. Our homeworld fails, our colonies struggle, our population dwindles. We could have come to Earth as conquerors. Our technology would have made it simple. Instead, we came as refugees seeking not just sanctuary but hope. Her eyes found Marcus in the audience, and we found that hope in the most unexpected place. A human who saw 3 starving creatures in an alley and chose kindness over convenience. Who opened his home to strangers without thought of reward. This is what I propose, she continued. Not an empire built on conquest, not a hierarchy based on species, but an alliance of equals. Dragons and humans working together, sharing knowledge freely, protecting each other not from obligation but from choice. She paused, letting her words sink in. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it requires trust, but it's also the only path that preserves what makes each of our species unique, while allowing us to become something greater together. Now it was Marcus's turn. He approached the podium, acutely aware that every eye in the room was on him. The prepared statements felt heavy in his pocket, but he found himself thinking instead about that night in the alley, about 3 frightened cats who had become his closest friends. Representatives of the galactic community, he began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. I'm not a politician or a diplomat. I'm a bookstore owner who happened to find 3 cats behind a dumpster. A murmur ran through the audience. This wasn't the formal response they'd expected. General Vorthak, your offer is impressive. Protection, technology, guaranteed expansion. But what you're really offering is to make us your junior soldiers in a war we didn't start. You want us to trade our independence for security. He turned to Ambassador Keelix. The Confederation offers membership, trade, prosperity, but always as the junior partner. Always having to prove ourselves worthy. You want us to trade our potential for stability. Finally, he faced Lyralay. And the peace faction offers partnership between equals. No guarantees except that we'll face whatever comes together. Marcus took a deep breath. I can only speak for myself, but I know which choice feels right. Not because it's safe or profitable, but because it honors what's best in both our species. He pulled out Lyralay's letter. Before I give our official response, I want to read something written by someone who understands both the risks and the possibilities better than any of us. He began to read Lyralee's words about hope, about the courage required to trust strangers, about the difference between cooperation and subjugation. Her voice through his filled the hall with a vision of what dragons and humans could accomplish together. When he finished, the hall was silent. Then General Vorthak stood, his expression thunderous. "Pretty words," he growled. "But words don't stop fleets or protect colonies. When the shooting starts, humans will remember that only strength matters." "Perhaps," Marcus replied. "But I've learned something these past weeks. Strength isn't just about weapons or armies. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is trust someone else to have your back." He looked directly at the Dragon General. "And, General, if you think humans are just looking for the easy path, you clearly haven't been paying attention to our history. We've never backed down from a fight when something important was at stake." Tank and Shadow both smiled at that, their expressions predatory. Lyralee simply nodded, her pride evident. "Now," Marcus continued, "for humanity's official response." He pulled out the prepared statements, but instead of reading from them, he set them aside. "Humanity chooses alliance with the peace faction. We choose partnership over protection, equality over safety, trust over certainty." The war faction delegation erupted in angry murmurs. The Confederation representatives exchanged glances that promised future complications. But the peace faction smiled, and Marcus felt something he hadn't expected, the absolute conviction that he'd made the right choice. "However," he continued, raising his voice over the noise, "let me be clear about something. This isn't a rejection of strength or a surrender to idealism. This is a declaration that humanity will forge its own path to the stars, in partnership with those who share our values." He looked around the room, meeting as many eyes as possible. "Any faction that tries to force a different path on us will discover just how much fight we have in us." General Vorthak stood slowly, his form beginning to shift toward his true dragon shape. "You've made your choice, human. Live with the consequences." But before he could fully transform, Lyralee was on her feet, her own transformation already beginning. "Uncle," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics, "if you want to threaten my allies, you'll have to go through me first." The summit had just become something much more dangerous. The tension in the summit hall was electric as uncle and niece faced each other, both beginning their transformations. General Vorthak's form expanded, dark scales erupting across his skin as his true draconic nature emerged. Lyralee's change was more graceful but no less impressive, her silver scales catching the light as her wings spread wide. "You would threaten family for these primitive mammals?" Vorthak snarled, his voice now carrying the deep resonance of his true form. "I would protect those who showed me kindness when I had nothing," Lyralee replied, her own voice harmonizing with power, "something you've forgotten the meaning of." Marcus found himself caught between awe and terror. The two dragons were magnificent and terrifying, their presence filling the vast hall with an energy that made the air itself feel heavy. Around them, other delegates scrambled for cover as security forces tried to decide whether to intervene. "Enough," came a new voice, and everyone turned to see Commander Thane stepping forward. "General, you forget yourself. This is a diplomatic summit, not a battlefield." "Diplomacy is for the weak," Vorthak rumbled, but he stopped his advance toward Lyralee. "My niece has chosen to align with inferiors. She has forgotten what it means to be dragon." "No," Lyralee said firmly. "I've remembered what it means to be worthy of the title." Before the confrontation could escalate further, Ambassador Keelix activated some kind of device that filled the air with a harmonic dampening field. The dragon's natural energy signatures were muted, forcing them back toward their humanoid forms. "Enough posturing," she said coolly. "The choice has been made. Now we deal with reality." General Vorthak glared at Marcus with naked hostility. "You think your alliance with exiles will protect you? When my fleets arrive at your borders, when your colonies burn? Remember that you chose this path. Is that a threat against Earth?" Agent Rodriguez had appeared at Marcus's side, her hand resting on what was obviously a weapon. "It's a promise," Vorthak replied. "The weak deserve what they get." But Tank stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the general's view of Marcus. "Uncle," he said, using the same family term Lyralee had. "You trained me yourself. Did you teach me nothing about honor?" Vorthak's expression shifted to something that might have been pain. "I taught you to be strong, nephew. To take what you need to survive. You taught me to protect those who couldn't protect themselves," Tank corrected. Marcus did exactly that when he found us. How is that weakness? Shadow materialized beside his companions, his form still wreathed in darkness. Perhaps the general has forgotten the old ways, he said quietly. When strength was measured not by what you could destroy but by what you chose to preserve. For a moment, Vorthak looked genuinely conflicted. Marcus could see the family resemblance now. The same strong features, the same intense eyes. But where Lyrelei and Tank showed warmth beneath their strength, Vorthak seemed to have buried any softness long ago. The old ways failed, he said finally. They left us scattered and dying. The old ways are why we survived long enough to find hope again, Lyrelei countered. Uncle, look around you. We're not the only species here searching for something better. The universe is full of peoples trying to find their place among the stars. She gestured to the mixed delegation, humans, dragons, and the various Confederation species. We can be part of something larger than ourselves, or we can remain isolated in our own pride until we fade away entirely. Ambassador Keelix chose that moment to interject. This family drama is fascinating, but there are practical matters to consider. General, your war faction has been outvoted. Humanity has chosen their alliance. The choice of one human doesn't speak for an entire species, Vorthak replied. Marcus stepped forward, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Actually, it does, at least in this case. He pulled out his phone and showed a live news feed. The summit has been broadcast worldwide. The response has been interesting. The screens around the hall lit up with feeds from major cities across Earth. Protests, but not the kind anyone had expected. Signs reading "Welcome Galactic Refugees" and "Earth Stands with the Exiled" filled streets from New York to Tokyo to Lagos. Turns out, Marcus continued, most humans understand what it's like to help someone in need. We've been doing it for each other for thousands of years. Ambassador Keelix's expression had gone carefully neutral. The Confederation will respect humanity's choice, of course, though we hope you'll reconsider once you face the realities of galactic politics. Is that a threat too? Rodriguez asked. Merely an observation. Junior species often find themselves overwhelmed by the complexities of interstellar relations. Lyrelei stepped closer to the ambassador. The Confederation has a habit of creating those complexities to maintain their control. How many species have you rescued from problems you helped create? The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Several of the other species in the Confederation delegation shifted uncomfortably, and Marcus realized that Lyrelei had struck a nerve. We provide stability, Keelix replied stiffly. You provide dependence, Shadow corrected from his position in the shadows. I've seen your trade agreements, your mutual defense pacts. Very few species ever graduate from junior status. Marcus was beginning to understand the broader political landscape. 3 factions, each representing a different philosophy of survival in a dangerous galaxy. Conquest, control, or cooperation. So what happens now? He asked. Commander Thane stepped forward. Now we build something new. The Peace faction formally recognizes Earth as an independent ally. We share technology, knowledge, and resources freely. We work together to find solutions to the challenges facing both our species. And when the War faction comes calling? Marcus asked. Then we stand together, Lyrelei said simply. Dragons and humans as equals. General Vorthak laughed, a sound like grinding metal. You think your alliance will matter when the real threats emerge? There are things in the dark between stars that make our little family dispute look like a children's game. His expression grew serious, almost worried. There's a reason the houses have been scattering, niece. Something is coming, something that makes even the War faction nervous. What kind of something? Rodriguez demanded. But Vorthak was already walking toward the exit. Ask your new allies, he said over his shoulder. They've been running from it longer than anyone. After he left, the hall buzzed with nervous energy. Marcus looked at Lyrelei, who had gone very pale. What is he talking about? Marcus asked. The Devourers, she said quietly. An ancient enemy that our people thought destroyed millennia ago. If they've returned, that's a conversation for later. Thane interrupted, glancing around at the mixed crowd of delegates and reporters. For now, we have an alliance to formalize and a future to build. But as they worked through the technical details of the new partnership, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just committed humanity to something far larger and more dangerous than anyone realized. The 3 homeless cats he'd taken in had revealed themselves as exiled royalty, and now Earth was part of a galactic conflict that went back thousands of years. Still, when he looked at Lirelei working alongside human diplomats, at Tank and Shadow coordinating with Earth security forces, he felt that same sense of rightness he'd experienced that first night. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together. The alliance between dragons and humans was official, but Marcus suspected their real tests were just beginning. As the formal ceremonies concluded and the various delegations began to disperse, Ambassador Keelix approached Marcus one final time. "You've made your choice," she said quietly. "I hope you're prepared for what comes next. The galaxy is not kind to idealists." "Maybe not," Marcus replied. "But it's not kind to anyone else either. At least this way we get to face it with friends." She smiled, but it was cold. "We'll see how long that friendship lasts when the real pressure begins." As she walked away, Shadow appeared at Marcus's elbow. "She's not wrong about the pressure," he said quietly. "But she's wrong about the friendship. How can you be sure?" Shadow looked at him with something that might have been affection. "Because you've already proven it. When those 3 assassins came for us, you didn't run. You stood by us even when you didn't understand what was happening. That was different. That was personal." "All the best alliances are," Lirelei said, joining them, "when species fight for each other not because of treaties or obligations, but because they've chosen to care about each other's survival." Looking around at the mixed group of humans and dragons working together, Marcus thought she might be right. They'd started with 3 homeless cats and a simple act of kindness. Now they were building something that could change the galaxy. The question was whether they'd have time to make it work before whatever was coming in the dark found them. 3 months after the summit, Marcus stood in what had once been his simple bookstore, now transformed into something resembling a cross between a library and a command center. Dragon technology had restored the building, but also enhanced it far beyond its original purpose. Holographic displays showed real-time data from across the solar system, while translation matrices allowed seamless communication with species from a dozen different worlds. The changes weren't just technological. Earth itself was transforming at a pace that made some humans nervous and others exhilarated. Dragon refugees had established settlements in remote areas, sharing their knowledge freely while learning human customs and culture. The first joint human-dragon space missions had launched just weeks ago, heading for the asteroid belt to establish mining operations that would benefit both species. The integration is proceeding faster than our most optimistic projections, Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation, despite the name, reported during their daily briefing. She was one of the xenobiologists working to understand dragon physiology and technology. Their approach to energy manipulation is revolutionizing our understanding of physics. Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on the more troubling reports coming in from the outer edges of the solar system. Long-range sensors enhanced with dragon technology were detecting anomalous readings in the space beyond Pluto. "Any word from the deep space patrols?" he asked. Agent Rodriguez, now serving as Earth's coordinator for extraterrestrial affairs, pulled up another display. Patrol 7 reported some unusual energy signatures yesterday, but nothing definitive. Could be natural phenomena or equipment malfunction. But Lirelei, who had taken up permanent residence in Marcus's expanded building, looked troubled. "Show me the readings again." The holographic display materialized between them, showing wavelength patterns that meant nothing to Marcus, but clearly disturbed the Dragon Queen. Tank and Shadow, ever present at her side, moved closer to examine the data. "This can't be right," Tank rumbled, his usual confidence shaken. "What are you seeing that we're not?" Marcus asked. Shadow's form seemed to ripple with agitation. "These energy signatures, they match historical records from the last war, from when the Devourers attacked our homeworld." The room fell silent. Since General Vorthak's ominous warning at the summit, they'd been researching the Devourers, but concrete information was scarce. Most of the records had been lost or deliberately destroyed, leaving only fragments and legends. "Tell me everything you know," Marcus said quietly. Lirelei moved to the center of the room, her expression grave. "The Devourers aren't a species in any sense we understand. They're more like a force of nature with intelligence behind it. They consume life energy, leaving dead worlds in their wake. Our ancestors fought them thousands of years ago," Tank added. "It took an alliance of every major species in our region of the galaxy to drive them back. The cost was enormous, entire worlds evacuated, fleets destroyed, civilizations reduced to refugees." "And you think they're coming here?" "The pattern fits," Shadow said. manipulating the display to show historical data alongside the current readings. They probe first, testing defenses and gathering intelligence. Then they send scouts. Finally, the main force arrives. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. How long do we have? Based on historical patterns? Months, maybe a year before the first major incursion, Lyrelai replied. But Marcus, you have to understand, this changes everything. The war faction wasn't paranoid. They were preparing for this. Are you saying we made the wrong choice? No, she said firmly. But we're going to need help. More help than just our two species can provide. Rodriguez leaned forward. What kind of help? The kind that requires us to reach out to former enemies, Tank said grimly. Including the Confederation and yes, even the war faction. Marcus spent the next several hours in communication with leaders across Earth and beyond. The reaction was predictably mixed. Some saw the potential threat as validation of their fears about alien contact. Others viewed it as an opportunity to prove humanity's worth on the galactic stage. But it was a call from an unexpected source that changed everything. Marcus Chen, the voice came through the communication array with crystal clarity, speaking perfect English despite its obviously non-human harmonics. Speaking. Who is this? General Vorthak. I believe we need to talk. The holographic projection that materialized showed the Dragon General in what appeared to be a military command center. Behind him, Marcus could see dozens of other dragons working at control stations. General, Marcus replied carefully, this is unexpected. The deep space monitors in the war faction territories have detected the same anomalies you're seeing, Vorthak said without preamble. My niece was right about many things, but she was wrong about one crucial detail. Which is? The Devourers aren't just coming for dragon worlds this time. They're coming for any world that shows signs of advancing civilization. Earth's recent technological leap has made you a target. Lyrelai stepped into view of the projector. Uncle, it's been some time. Lyrelai. Vorthak's expression softened slightly. I've come to propose something I never thought I would. A temporary alliance between all factions, war, peace, and confederation, to deal with this threat. The Confederation will never agree to that, Rodriguez interjected. They already have, came a new voice, and Ambassador Keelix materialized in a second holographic projection. The situation has become too serious for political games. Marcus looked around at the assembled group, human, Dragon War faction, Dragon Peace faction, and Confederation, all united by a common threat. What are we looking at exactly? He asked. Vorthak activated a star chart that showed the local galactic region. Red markers indicated confirmed Devourer activity. Yellow showed probable sightings, and orange marked worlds that had gone silent. The pattern is expanding toward this region, Keelix explained. At current rate of advance, they'll reach Earth's solar system within 8 months. 8 months to prepare for an enemy that required the combined might of multiple galactic civilizations to defeat last time, Marcus said, and that was when those civilizations were at their peak. Yes, Vorthak agreed grimly. Which is why we need to try something that's never been attempted before. What's that? Instead of just defending against them, we're going to try to understand them, and if possible, communicate with them. The suggestion sent a ripple of shock through the assembled group. Uncle, that's incredibly dangerous, Lyrelai protested. The Devourers don't communicate. They consume. Based on records thousands of years old, Vorthak countered. What if we were wrong? What if they were trying to communicate and we just didn't understand? Shadow emerged from his hiding place, his expression thoughtful. There were always inconsistencies in the historical records. Instances where they seemed to avoid certain targets, patterns that suggested intelligence rather than pure instinct. It's worth investigating, Keelix agreed. The Confederation has access to archaeological data from several Devourer encounter sites. If we can combine that with dragon historical records and human analytical capabilities, we might find a way to end this threat permanently instead of just driving it off again. Marcus finished. It was an enormous risk. If they were wrong, if the Devourers truly were an unstoppable force of destruction, then spending time trying to communicate could doom Earth and every other world in their path. But if they were right, what do you need from us? Marcus asked. Everything, Vorthak replied. Every ship, every scientist, every innovative idea your species can provide. This alliance needs to be more than just military cooperation. It needs to be a true merging of knowledge and capabilities. Marcus looked at Lyrelai, who nodded slowly. It's our best chance, she said. And if we fail together, Tank finished. As it should be. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity as the hastily formed alliance began coordinating their efforts. Human ingenuity, dragon technology, and Confederation resources started flowing together in ways that would have been impossible just months ago. But as Marcus watched the various species working side by side, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. The Devourers had been dormant for thousands of years. Why were they active again now? What had changed? Lyrelai, he said during a brief break in the planning. What if this isn't about them coming for us? What do you mean? What if they're running from something even worse? The thought hung in the air between them, terrifying in its implications. If the Devourers were fleeing from some greater threat, then everything they thought they knew about the situation might be wrong, and they were about to find out just how wrong they could be. The moment of first contact came not with fanfare or careful diplomatic protocols, but with a desperate transmission that cut through every communication channel in the solar system simultaneously. Marcus was in the Joint Command Center when every screen, every display, every device capable of receiving signals suddenly showed the same image. A vast ship, clearly damaged, drifting in the space beyond Neptune. But it wasn't the ship that made everyone freeze. It was what was pursuing it. The Devourers, when seen in their true form, defied easy description. They seemed to exist partially outside normal space, their forms shifting between geometric patterns and organic shapes that hurt to look at directly. They moved through space like living shadows, leaving trails of absolutely nothing in their wake. Not just empty space, but areas where space itself seemed diminished. This is impossible, breathed Dr. Chen, staring at the readings. Those energy patterns suggest they're actually consuming the fundamental structure of reality itself. But it was the transmission from the fleeing ship that changed everything they thought they knew. Please, the voice said in heavily accented but understandable English. We are the last. Our worlds are gone, our people scattered. The hunger follows us still, but perhaps together we can find another way. The voice belonged to something that looked remarkably like a devourer, but smaller, more stable in form. As they watched, several more ships appeared, all fleeing the pursuing shadows. They're refugees, Lyrelai said in amazement. The Devourers aren't a unified force. They're two different groups. General Vorthak's voice crackled through the communication array. Impossible. The Devourers are a plague, not a civilization. Uncle, Lyrelai replied. Look at the tactical displays. The fleeing ships are protecting something in the center of their formation. They're not acting like predators. They're acting like parents. Marcus made a decision that would either save everyone or doom them all. Open a channel to the fleeing ships. Full translation protocols. Marcus, Agent Rodriguez warned, this could be a trap. Everything we've done since this started has been a risk, he replied. But that voice sounded desperate, familiar. The connection established and the being on the screen was indeed similar to the pursuing Devourers, but its form was more stable, more defined. When it spoke, Marcus heard an echo of every refugee he'd ever encountered. The fear, the hope, the exhaustion of running from something terrible. I am seeker of patterns. Speaker for the remnant, the being said. We have fled across the galaxy for 10,000 cycles seeking those who might understand. Understand what? Marcus asked. That we were like you once. We had worlds, families, hopes for the future, until we created our own destruction in our hunger for growth. The being's form shifted, showing images that appeared in the air around them. Worlds covered with geometric cities, beings of energy and light working together, reaching for the stars with tools that bent reality itself. We learned to consume energy directly from the fabric of space, Seeker continued. It seemed like the ultimate solution. Unlimited power, no need for resources, no environmental impact. We were so proud of our innovation. What went wrong? Lyrelai asked gently. We became addicted. The more we consumed, the more we needed. Some of us fought against the hunger, tried to return to older ways. But others embraced it completely. They became the Devourers, consuming not just energy but the very structure of reality itself. The pursuing shadows had stopped, as if sensing the communication. Marcus could see them clearly now. The Devourers were larger, more chaotic. their forms constantly shifting as they fed on the space around them. "Those who pursue us are our own people," Seeker said with evident pain. "Family, friends, lovers who chose the hunger over sanity. They seek to convert us to make us join in their eternal feeding." "Why come here?" Tank asked. "Why bring them to our worlds?" "Because you are unique," Seeker replied. "In all our travels across hundreds of species, we have never found ones who chose cooperation over competition so readily. Dragons who shared their knowledge freely, humans who offered help to strangers without thought of reward. Perhaps you can succeed where we failed." Marcus felt the weight of impossible hope settling on his shoulders. "What do you mean?" "We have learned much in our exile. The hunger can be stopped, but not through force. It requires something we lost long ago. The ability to be satisfied with enough. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't a war in any conventional sense. It was an intervention, a desperate attempt to save a species from its own destructive impulses. "Show us," Marcus said. What followed was the most intensive information transfer in human history. The remnants shared everything: their technology, their history, their failures, and most importantly, their understanding of how the addiction to unlimited consumption had destroyed their civilization. "It starts small," Seeker explained as data flowed between the ships. "A desire for more efficiency, more power, more growth. Each step seems logical, beneficial, but there's a threshold where efficiency becomes the only value, where growth becomes an end in itself." Dr. Chen was frantically analyzing the incoming data. "This is incredible. Their original technology was based on quantum field manipulation, but they kept pushing the boundaries until they were directly consuming the zero-point energy of empty space. And once they crossed that line?" Rodriguez asked. "They couldn't stop," Shadow answered grimly. "Like any addiction, it required increasingly larger doses to provide the same satisfaction." General Vorthak had been unusually quiet during the exchange. Finally, he spoke. "This changes our tactical situation completely. We're not fighting an enemy, we're staging an intervention for family members who've lost control." "Can it work?" Marcus asked Seeker directly. "Can they be saved?" "We don't know," came the honest reply. "But we've learned that they still retain some memory of what they once were. In moments of clarity they express regret, longing for the connections they've destroyed." The Devourers had begun moving again, but slowly, almost hesitantly. As they approached, Marcus could see that Seeker was right. There was something tragic about their movement, a kind of desperate searching rather than purposeful hunting. "What do you need from us?" Hyrule asked. "Help us create a place of stability," Seeker replied. "Somewhere they can exist without needing to consume, where the hunger can be satisfied by connection instead of destruction." It was Ambassador Keelix who grasped the full implications first. "You want to create a rehabilitation center for beings that consume reality itself." "The technology exists," Seeker confirmed, "but it requires the cooperation of multiple species, different approaches to energy and matter, different ways of understanding existence itself." Marcus looked around at his unlikely collection of allies: war faction dragons, peace faction refugees, Confederation representatives, and humans who just a year ago had no idea they weren't alone in the universe. "We'll need volunteers," he said finally. "People willing to work directly with beings that could accidentally unmake them if something goes wrong." "I'll do it," Tank said immediately. "They're someone's family. That matters, and Shadow added. "We've all made mistakes. The magnitude doesn't change the principle." One by one, representatives from every faction volunteered. Even General Vorthak, despite his military training, seemed to understand that this was about redemption rather than conquest. The next 6 months were the most challenging in human history. Working with remnant technology and guidance, the allied species constructed what could only be called a cosmic rehabilitation facility, a artificial space-time structure that provided stability without requiring the destruction of existing reality. The process of bringing the first Devourers into the facility was terrifying and heartbreaking in equal measure. These beings, once people like anyone else, were so consumed by their addiction that they initially couldn't even perceive the offer of help. But slowly, carefully, with infinite patience, the combined alliance began to make progress. The first successful rehabilitation took 4 months. A young devourer who had only recently crossed the threshold into unlimited consumption. When they emerged from the facility, stable and whole, they wept energy tears that sparkled like stars. "I remember," they said in a voice like cosmic wind. "I remember who I was before the hunger." It wasn't a complete victory. Many devourers were too far gone, too deeply lost in their addiction to accept help. But for those who could be reached, the Alliance offered something unprecedented, a path back from the brink of ultimate consumption. Marcus stood in his transformed bookstore, now serving as a coordination center for the largest humanitarian effort in galactic history, and thought about the strange journey that had brought them here. 3 homeless cats in an alley had led to humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, which had led to a cosmic intervention for an addicted species. "Regrets?" Lorelei asked, joining him at the window that now looked out on a spaceport where ships from a dozen species came and went regularly. "About which part?" Marcus replied. "Taking in 3 stray cats? Choosing alliance over safety? Agreeing to help rehabilitate reality-consuming entities? Any of it." Marcus considered the question seriously. Earth had changed beyond recognition. Humanity was now part of a galactic community, but also responsible for cosmic-scale problems. The future was uncertain in ways he could never have imagined. "No," he said finally. "No regrets. We're still doing the same thing we started with, helping people who need help. The scale is different, but the principle remains the same." Through the window, he could see a group of young dragons and humans working together on a joint project, their laughter carrying across the spaceport. In the distance, one of the rehabilitation facilities glowed softly, another step in the long process of healing a fractured species. Tank appeared in the doorway, now serving as coordinator for the military aspects of their operations. "The latest reports from the outer facilities are positive. 3 more successful rehabilitations this week." "Any word from the deep space patrols?" Marcus asked. "Nothing," Shadow replied, emerging from wherever he'd been hidden. "It's been 6 months since we detected any unreformed devourers in this region." "They're getting the message," Lorelei said with satisfaction. "Word is spreading through their networks that there's another way." Marcus smiled, thinking about how far they'd all come. "So what's next?" "Next," Tank said with a grin that showed far too many teeth, "we tackle the really hard part." "Which is?" "Teaching the Confederation Council how to share power with junior species," Shadow said with amusement. "And convincing the war faction that cooperation isn't weakness," Lorelei added. "And helping humanity figure out what it wants to be when it grows up as a galactic civilization," Tank finished. Marcus laughed, a sound that was equal parts exhaustion and anticipation. "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds easy." As night fell over their transformed world, Marcus reflected on the truth he'd learned through this incredible journey. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of beings struggling with problems beyond imagination. But it was also full of opportunities to help, to make connections, to choose kindness over fear. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, those small acts of kindness rippled outward in ways that changed everything. 3 homeless cats. That's how it had started. 3 hungry, frightened creatures in an alley, and a human who chose to help rather than walk away. Now, as Marcus looked out at the stars knowing that friends and former enemies worked together among them, he understood that this was how most important things began, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with someone seeing a need and deciding to meet it. The galaxy was still dangerous, still full of unknown threats and challenges, but it was also full of allies now, species working together not because they had to, but because they had chosen to care about each other's survival. And that, Marcus thought as he watched ships from a dozen worlds dock at humanity's first interstellar port, made all the difference.